I'm David Lovejoy, and I'm an artist, a thing maker, sculptor, carpenter. I'm talking to you here from my home in Pasadena. We're in the middle of a COVID quarantine lockdown here, and so my studio downtown Los Angeles, I closed in mid-March, and I've sublet it actually to a neighboring artist there who's kind of expanded. We knocked a door through in between the two, and I'm hoping when all of this washes out, then I'll be back there, but for now I'm working from home. Now, there's a couple of things I'll explain here. First of all, I keep chickens, so you may hear chickens in the background. And secondly, when I closed down my studio, everything moved home in a hurry, and so it hasn't all found its place yet. There's a lot of stuff in boxes, there's a lot of mess, and to add to that mess, this opportunity to talk to you comes to me in the middle of planning for construction. I'm about to raise the roof on my studio. We're going to add a second story. And so right now, a lot of where I normally work has been kind of pulled away and torn apart. So you'll see we're in the middle of that, but so be it. I wanted to start with a little bit of my background. I had a great art teacher, Mr. Sylvester, and in addition to being a high school art teacher, he was also a puppeteer. And he made his own puppets, and he went around with a puppeting troupe. I think it was a Lutheran group, and they would go and kind of evangelize through puppetry. But anyway, he would set us up doing painting or drawing or whatever, set us to a task as a class, and then he would go to his desk or his work table and work on his own thing. And sometimes that was classwork, and sometimes it was puppetry. And that was the first time that I saw someone just imagine something and make it. In my teaching, I was always shown something, and they would say, make that, or introduced to a technique and say, draw that apple or flower or whatever, but do it in this way. Follow this artist's, example. And he would sit down and just start making heads and hands and feet for these puppets out of clay. And first of all, it got me fascinated with clay, because you could just make things up. If you could imagine a thing, you could make a 3D thing out of clay. It's easy to model with. And secondly, the fact of just imagining something. He wasn't looking at a picture of a hand, he just knew what his puppet's hand should look like, and so he made it. So a lot of the work behind me here is some of my clay work, and I started off professionally as a clay artist. My first solo show was a ceramic show only. And I'm now more known for sculpture and assemblage and larger installation works and things like that. But I started off in clay. So a lot of my college education was geared around clay. I was working at the time in graphic design and advertising, and so a lot of 2D design came along in that way as well. I have a background in graphic design, but the 3D work that I do came out of clay, and the textures and things that I've always loved, I was trying to emulate in clay, and now I just kind of use those textures. I use the old things that always fascinated me. But we moved here to Pasadena about 15 years ago, and it's a very old house. It's an old craftsman house, and the electrical system couldn't support my kilns. I was working as a clay artist, and when I got here, I couldn't fire stuff right away. And so I started taking things that I had in my studio that I wasn't proud enough to show to galleries or to show in exhibitions, but there was still something I liked about it, and so it just hung out in my studio. And this piece here, this is a good example. This was a wood-fired piece that I made in a kiln, an Onagama kiln up in Oregon. Just this part of it is wood-fired clay, you can hear. And I punched these little holes in it from the inside, so it has kind of a cactus look. But this thing I built, this was made probably 2 years before I moved here. But then this top part I added after I moved here, because I was looking for ways to use some of the old stuff I'd collected. I've always just had a penchant for, if I find something on the side of the road, I'm gonna grab it. Or if I'm out for a walk and I see something catches my eye. So I have a lot of old things that I've collected over time. And so I started going through those bins and adding some of those things to my ceramic work. And so this is an example. This has an old, like an aquarium bulb down in the middle of it. This is just made up with sticks and kind of chicken wire. But it's an interesting piece, and I got a kick out of it. And so I started doing that. I started taking some of these things in between this time when I could fire my kilns, while I was waiting to get the electrical work done and dig trenches out to the studio, etc. It took a long time. And so during that time, I was taking existing ceramic work and adding other odds and ends, if you will, to it. And so that kind of got me started into assemblage. And through high school and college and art classes, art history classes, I had learned of certain artists that really kind of turned me on, and Joseph Cornell was one. Joseph Cornell is known for his boxes, and so I I started making boxes. And before I'd actually physically seen his work, I thought they were much larger than they were. And so my first boxes were huge, like, not huge, but as far as in comparison to his work, they were at least twice the size. One of the first ones I did was probably 4 feet high and maybe 3 feet wide. And when I actually saw his work, they're more the size of like a little medicine cabinet over a sink, a small or drawer. They're that size box. And so that fascination grew even further. And then when I saw his work for real, I noticed that a lot of his work were just for fun, were just games. Basically, he'd have a box and there'd be a little lid on the top where you could drop a ball in that he provided, and it would roll through the thing, and maybe you wouldn't even see it. Maybe it's rolling through in the background and only the sound is what you're saying, and then it would come out a little trapdoor on the bottom. Now, it was a composed piece with image and color, etc., but there was this little activity that went on in the background. And it's the kind of thing that was just for him and his friends, I think. I don't think that that was allowed in the gallery museum kind of interaction, but it amused me. And a lot of what I guess motivates me, inspires me in my work is fun. I have fun doing what I do. I enjoy it. And I think that joy comes through in the work, and it's allowed me to do a variety of things. So rather than just sit here and talk to you, I'm gonna take you for a little tour around, but understand, first there's chickens, and second, it's all under construction. So there's a big mess. But anyway, here's a little tour of my studio. Okay. So this is my yard, my chicken coop. This is one of the things I've done during quarantine. We decided we were gonna start chickens, start raising chickens. And so I built this coop, and I had a great time doing it. As I mentioned, I'm a carpenter and sculptor, and so this has some little odds and ends. I like using old things. Some of the latches in here, like this, is part of an old movie projector that's used here as the window latch. The little handles and things I made myself. And so I got to play around a little bit. There's a little window here for no reason, just because I had a little picture frame of that size. Some old signs and things that are part of it. But this is my studio. And it's a huge mess. This whole pile of stuff doesn't belong here, but here it is. That was all stacked with materials, all up there. This corner was all pegboard. This is where my workbench was. So all of this has gone away. So right now it's a very chaotic space. I still have a little bit of workbench here, and here's a couple of things I've made. This on the right, I call these Leatherby lamps, like let there be light, Leatherby light. And it's this one is an old projector case. And I've poked holes in it and put lenses in it. It has wheels, but it's also rigged to hang. And it's just a fun play with lights and lenses. It's got some old photographs and stuff inside, some old light bulbs stuck to it that aren't really powered. They just kind of glow in there. So you can pull one out. Oh, here's another one. This one comes out. This again is like an old aquarium bulb. But it kind of glows light through there just because there's light bulbs inside. Part of an old movie camera. And a lot of the parts I use, like this is the surround from a deadbolt lock. That's where you would put the key in. This is, I don't know if we can get close enough to see it, but it says incinerator around the edge. It's actually a drain metal. This is from plumbing. This is a plumbing part. But you start putting lenses and things in them, and they make sense. It looks like it's an old camera or something like that. This is another piece I made. This is called a zoetrope, if you're familiar with what a zoetrope is. And it's made of all kinds of just odds and ends. This is a bait bucket that you would use for fishing. It has a top that kind of raises up. This is actually the mouthpiece from an old westerns where they had the crank telephone. That's a mouthpiece. That's what that is, from an old telephone. And then this is the bottom of a teacup, and it has a lens in the end of it here. But let me turn it on. It's a zoetrope. And so if you look inside, it's a little odd on the camera, but you can see a horse running in there. And I rigged it so without the squeak. That's one of the reasons it's on my workbench, because I want to repair that squeak. But it kind of has the galloping cadence of a horse running. And that's very famous old photography. There was a photographer named Edward Murbridge, and kind of on a bet, he wanted to see if there was ever a time where a horse had all 4 feet off the ground. And so he set up a sequence of cameras along the line where the horse was racing. Still cameras, but it would take a picture, 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 picture as the horse went by. And that became basically one of the first animations. If you picture that kind of thing in a flip book, that's what that is. So that's called a zoetrope, and it's a real thing. You can look it up and find other examples. It's just a wheel that turns with little slots in it, and through the slot, this series of images looks like it's animating. And that is actually a hamster wheel that they're attached to. I mentioned before my love of Joseph Cornell's boxes. This is some of my work here on the fence. Just with the studio under construction, I had to find a safe place to put it. So I've got it here under some tarps. But you see they're mostly dimensional, mostly box type forms. The thing I love about the box and the dimensionality of it is that you can have things move around. This is a good interaction. And of course, it's terribly reflective out here, so this won't be the best, but you can kind of see how the relationships of things change as you walk by. There's different planes. And so things are both hidden and exposed as you move around. And I like that. I like working with the depth of field and things like that. And you can also do little visual tricks. This is one, again, I don't know how this will play here in the reflection. But this is a postcard or a photograph in the background of a wall with a hole in it. It was probably a cannon port or something back in medieval days. This is from Croatia. And then in this is a little metal cup. And inside is a woman standing there holding a little portfolio or something. And it's a totally different era probably even. But the fact that this has a solid horizontal line here, and in the back there's that solid horizon in there. I could overlay them, and it's a visual trick. When you walk up to it, it looks like you're looking at a lens. It looks like you're looking through this thing at that photograph, but they're not connected. They're not from the same source. It's just a little visual play. And that's one of the things I like about the depth of making boxes. With my shop in such upheaval, a lot of it has moved out here now. So this is a rack of all my materials, not all my materials, but a lot of my small stuff. You can see by some of the names, some of the things that are in there. And it may or may not be true. Let me just take one down at random. Now this is my temporary workspace out here. I have a little bit of a workbench with some light and my saw and other tools out here. Now these, I had a friend who worked for the city, and these are tabs from one of their little order things in the office. They would keep track of their different vendors, you know, for getting parts for machinery and things like that. But they're just neat old hand-typed cards. And they have a little bit of fading to them. And so I've used these in a couple of pieces, just kind of as a background with other stuff going on in front of it. There's some parts that I've put a lens in. That's going to be part of a lamp. This is a cone. When you fire ceramics, there's a cone that melts at a certain temperature, and that lets you know that it's done. That's what this is. It's called a pyrometric cone. But when it's done, it's a hardened piece of clay, and it has this kind of talon-like look. So sometimes those also get used in my work. Little circuit block. I'm assuming, yep, that's lenses in there. Some interesting glass from a chandelier. It's not really a lens, it's clear in the middle, but the distortion on the outside edges it gives it some cool activity. Again, that kind of thing that as you walk by, it changes and morphs. And so I look for things that work like that. I like that kind of aspect in my work. Now, this is a class, so I feel like I have to give you a lesson. I was given a few questions and things to touch on, and I've touched on some of those. But I also just want to give you something that you can kind of take away. If I were to give you personally, if we met and you said, hey, I'm an artist, how do I get going? How do I do what I want to do? My main advice would be to volunteer. And when I say volunteer, I'm not talking about getting an internship where someone is taking you in a subservient role to use you. You run and get coffee, you do whatever. I do not agree with that kind of program. I don't think you get much out of it other than connections, maybe. But if you actually volunteer for maybe at an art center or for anything that involves you, you hear maybe through your school that there's a visiting artist coming in that's going to give a lesson or do something. You could ask, does he need any help? Could I be the liaison? Could I just kind of be there as right hand if he needs somebody to plug something in or whatever? You'll have some cool opportunities to talk to that person and to get their take on your environment. And you might even make a friend that can have a relationship. That's what happened with me with Patrick Doherty. I volunteered to help him on one of his sculptures. I worked on probably 7 different sculptures of his that I assisted on. And I got to do some cool stuff and go to some cool places. And then I became part of his arsenal. So when he couldn't do something, he could refer me. He said, I've trained this guy to do the thing that I do, and he's pretty good. You should talk to him. And that's how the work at the Natural History Museum came about. And that's that's a 6-year relationship. And it's in my own hometown. That's the museum I went to as a kid. So I got a chance to do at the time stuff at Google, their headquarters up in Canada. I built 12 pieces there. One of them is a series of pieces that runs through all 4 stories of the building. And one is its own room. I did an entire room there. But that would not have come about if it wasn't for that relationship that I built through volunteering for Patrick Doherty. The thing about coming to a project as a volunteer rather than as an intern is that when you volunteer, you're all at an equal plane, and no one really knows what the rest of you do in real life. This is a thing you're doing outside of your norm. You've given up your job or school or watching TV on the weekend to come and be part of this team doing this thing. And so a lot of the hierarchy is removed. Quite often in a social setting or when you're meeting people, one of the very first questions is, what do you do? And there's, if you say, oh, I'm a student or I'm an artist, some people look down on that. And when you work as a volunteer, you're just someone there to help. And a lot of that caste system kind of thing is removed, and you can have some great dialogues with people at all echelons of life, and you can get some valuable input, meet some valuable people, and find some opportunities. And a lot of the people's agendas that normally exist in the workplace don't exist in a volunteer opportunity. And so quite often you are seen as someone just willing to help, and that can help you later on. Another thing I would recommend is, as far as plagiarizing, I encourage it, but not in your same medium. And also now I would say there's an exception for digital media, because in digital media you can reproduce anything, and it's going to look like that thing. So I would say that's a caveat. I would not apply what I'm about to tell you to digital, because that's not my world, and I think it's different. But as far as if you're painting or making, or maybe you're a photographer, whatever your specific creative interest is, if you get just stuck and you can't come up with an idea, I was going to say normally I would recommend go to a show, but you can't right now because we're all quarantined. So rather than that, look it up online. If maybe you're a painter and you can't think of what to paint, look at a sculpture show or look at a photography show or something like that and say, wow, I dig that image. I'm going to make my own copy of it, but in a totally different medium. And so just by translating it in that way, from maybe photography to sculpture or from whatever to painting or whatever, just the fact of changing the medium changes the work and your own hand in that medium and your own impression of the thing that you're copying. If you say, that's a cool photograph, I'm going to go take a photograph of that same thing, you're going nowhere. That's a cool painting, I'm going to paint a painting of that painting, you're going nowhere, or not as far. But if you say, that's a cool painting, I'm going to render it in charcoal on the back of a cardboard box, that's a challenge. And that's you doing that. You were inspired by the thing you saw, but it's stimulating your creativity and your imagination. And so if you do get stuck, feel free to copy, but don't copy the thing that you're doing. If you're doing a drawing, don't copy a drawing. If you're doing a painting, don't copy a painting. But feel free, it's all out there. Look at stuff and get that stimulus. Just as a bump start. Don't make that your career. But when you get stuck, it's fine. to do that and translate it in your own way. So if that's my lesson, if I can give a lesson. Now, one other thing, I've mentioned a few artists, and I'm going to, if I'm worth my salt here with video chops, I'm going to put up some still images of some of these people I'm mentioning. And I'll read off my list because I don't want to exclude anybody. I'm inspired by the work of Joseph Cornell, as I mentioned, Marcel Duchamp, Louise Nevelson. This piece behind me, that client sent me like 5 pictures of Louise Nevelson's work. And I don't want to copy Louise Nevelson's work. She's an established artist and very known for the expertise that she did the things that she did. But that's what the client asked for, and it's right in my wheelhouse. It's working with a lot of the same materials. So that brings up another lesson. When I worked in ceramics, I was making these kind of temple forms. And I came across another artist. I went to see a show, and there was another ceramic artist who was making temple forms, very different from mine. And probably people looking at my work wouldn't even see it as a temple. But to me, that's what I was making. And so when I saw this more established teaching artist doing temples, I backed off. I stopped doing that and I started doing something else because I didn't want to be seen as copying his work. Later, I looked at that as a mistake because I was on a path that just happened to bump into this guy. And I should have continued, and I didn't. I made my own detour. And who knows what I would have come up with in clay had I not done that. But when I started making boxes and when I came upon Cornell's work, I thought, wow, what I'm doing is really kind of similar to Joseph Cornell's work. And I don't want to be seen as just somebody ripping off Joseph Cornell's work. And so I made a piece called Joe's Juke Joint. And up inside the frame, you couldn't even see it really unless you owned it and could manipulate it in such a way. But up inside the frame, there was a typewritten line that said, with apologies to Mr. Joseph Cornell for pilfering his imagination. And I made a Cornell piece. I made it as if he would have made it. I followed his examples, but then I got it out of my system. And so I was able to see what the next piece was and the next piece after that, still on the path that I was on. And the difference between those two experiences, now that I look back on them, was very strong. So I would recommend first of all, if you're accused, somebody critiques your work and says, oh, you're basically just copying so-and-so, don't dismiss it. Think about it, because maybe you are. And maybe the things that they're seeing in your work, you've not seen. But don't just dismiss it. But also consider it and say, okay, maybe I am. And so now I'm going to dive in and do that wholeheartedly, purposely, make one of those pieces for myself. And then see what the next piece is and the next piece. Because you'll have those intersections. You're influenced. You'll see these things that influence you and you'll say, oh, wow, there are things in my work. You'll notice on some of the glass, I've drawn a little circle or something. There's marking on the inside of the glass that you can't touch, but I've left it there and then closed it up. That's a Joseph Cornell thing. He did that. And I stole that wholeheartedly from him. But it's not this principal thing of his work. It's just an aspect of his work. And I loved it. And it works within my work. And so I took it. And I don't think if he were alive that he would mind. And critics who have talked about my work have not minded. But that's where it came from. So I would say have your role models, those artists that inspire you. I stopped at Louise Nevelson. I would say Man Ray. Contemporary artist Patrick Doherty also obviously inspires me. Ai Weiwei does some amazing things, and Amish Kapoor does some amazing things. Amish Kapoor, I love the work that he does outdoors. He's done some massive things that play with scale, and I love playing with scale. I like doing things that kind of are confusing when you first see them. You don't know what you're seeing until you get closer and interact with it a little bit, and I like that. And Ai Weiwei has done some things with multiples of just simple things, stools and bicycles and whatever. And I think of my lens work when I think of Ai Weiwei. It's just a magnifying glass, but if I hang up 1,000 of them, it's fascinating to be in that space. And same thing with Ai Weiwei. He doesn't change this bicycle in any way. It's just a bicycle. But if you do something, build a wall of 1,000 bicycles, it's immediately striking. And that kind of playing with multiples, I really, really like. Another contemporary artist is Olafur Eliasson. One of the most amazing pieces I ever saw was by Olafur Eliasson, and it was the simplest piece I've ever seen. It was I think it was in San Francisco at the Museum of Art there. And it has a large rotunda, maybe 4 stories high. That's the central opening. When you first walk into the museum, you come to this big round room, and there's the desk where you get your tickets and map and whatever, and all the arms of the museum. There's the, history and European and the masters and Renaissance, whatever, all go off of that center that central rotunda, that center round room. From the top of this dome, Olaus Eliasson hung just a simple desk fan, a little oscillating fan, just hanging from its cord down into the middle of that room, probably at about 10 or 11 feet off the ground, and turned it on. So the nature of a fan, it blows, and the nature of something hanging, it swings. So those two combinations made it fascinating. This fan would blow itself up to a certain point and then maybe turn and then swing back across the room. Sometimes it would go and stall, the air just holding it there until it pivoted a little bit. Sometimes it would get a pendulum swing and turn so that it was accelerated and just swoop through the room. But if you went to that space, that rotunda, on any other time, it is just a mash of people. It looks like Grand Central Station with everybody coming and going from all these different arteries. If you went to that room during that installation of the piece called Ventilator, the hanging box fan or oscillating fan, it was maybe 16 inches across. It was nothing striking. But the way that it controlled that room had people laying on the floor to watch this activity go on around them. And other than that, it had people around the perimeter, because that swooping thing had dominated the center court. And it was so simple and so powerful that it just stuck with me. And that kind of thing, where you can take a simple idea and by its environment make it incredibly strong, those are strong works. And so look for those kind of opportunities. So just because it's a big space, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a little tiny thing that interacts with the space in such a way that energy of that interaction is the work. It's the striking thing. So those are some examples. Hopefully I'll be able to tack some of those onto this video. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was informative. I hope I have another opportunity, maybe with some of you, to do this again and you can see this thing finished with a ceiling. I didn't explain, I have these strings in my studio at an awkward height. That's going to be the floor of the upstairs. So that'll be the ceiling here, and then I'll push out upstairs. So thank you, and again, I hope it was worthwhile. And again, this is Dave Lovejoy, and I wish you all well. Be creative, be imaginative. Now, I said I wanted to give you a lesson. I also want to give you a project. We're in obviously odd times. You don't have your classroom and your teacher and all those things around you as you normally do. And you may not have materials to do much at home. But there's one odd thing that's come up through COVID and quarantine and all that, and there is an abundance of cardboard. Most everybody at the front door is getting a bit more box activity than they usually do. There are boxes going through homes, coming in full, going out empty, and it's a readily available material. So I would recommend that if you're not doing something else, grab a few, collect a few boxes of different size, play with them like blocks if you want, and kind of arrange them, cut them open, unfold them, whatever. It's a great material. I've done some cool things with cardboard. I did a piece that was a centerpiece for a music video. I did this little talk is sponsored by Lightbringer Project, and Lightbringer also sponsors the Doodah Parade. And I did a moving castle for one of the Doodah parades out of my old truck that was completely made of cardboard. I did a massive picture frame for another float that was all made of cardboard. It's a very versatile material. It's easy to cut with a kitchen knife or a pair of good scissors. So grab some cardboard. It's also good as a canvas. It has a neat texture to it, and it takes pastel and marker and crayon and all kinds of things. It takes it well. And it's easy to cut. I have a friend who right now, aside from her studio, aside from being able to get canvases at the store like normally she would, she's working on cardboard. And she's doing little figures and then cutting them out. And it has a neat look. It's the kind of subjects of her normal work, but removed from that and made real. It's a little 3D cardboard thing. And I think that's a neat take on her existing work. And so I would grab some cardboard, but play around with it and see how you're inspired, because it's a readily available material and it's something you don't have to go out and get. So you can put it together with tape, screws, staples, glue, whatever you got. Or make, tab A into slot B. You can engineer it however you want. But I would encourage you. That's a material that you've got. Play around with it. And maybe your instructor has already given you some directions in this way, but if not, maybe some project could come out of it. So thank you. Bye-bye.